broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let's get that on full screen. All right, very good morning to you if you're in the Americas or in the Caribbean. Good afternoon if you're in Europe and the Middle East, and very good evening if you're tuning in from the Asia Pacific region. And welcome to today's Crossing Borders broadcast, the IMC streaming service, which has been created to keep investment migration professionals connected and informed during this period. If you haven't seen one of these broadcasts before, don't worry. You can watch all of the previous programs or on catch up through our YouTube channel. Just search Investment Migration Council, and don't forget to hit like, share, and hit subscribe. Today's broadcast is very kindly supported by our partner sponsor, Beshara Global Migration Law Firm down in Florida in the United States. And it's a very special broadcast as the managing partner of the firm, Edward Beshara, will be taking over from my usual role of presenting this program. Remember, you can ask questions in the widget on the right of your screen, and you'll also find some useful handouts. We've got 3 handouts there for you today. And to keep you engaged as ever, we also have a little bit of polling. So we're going to kick off with a poll, and it's always good for our panelists and even for ourselves to find out where everybody is from today. So let's put that up on the screen, and if you can choose one of the 5 options, we'll give you about 10 seconds to go through those. Normally stop at about 80%, so we're at 75%. Okay, guys, good voting. Where are you from today? All right, 85%. I'm going to close that off, and I'm going to share the results on the screen, please. I hope my panelists, today's panelists, can you see the results on the screen?
Sure.
Yep.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Okay, so overwhelmingly 53% from the Americas, 20% from the Middle East and Europe and Africa, and 7% from the Asia Pacific region. So that's, of course, very interesting for us to know. Also, there's a short video at the end of today's program about how you can get qualified through the certification in investment migration. So do stay with us. But back to today's broadcast, keeping our community informed and together. A New Dawn. Today's broadcast is entitled A New Dawn to the US with employment-based 1C visa category, but we'll also be discussing the L1A. So, of course, during these times of economic and financial concerns, a new dawn has emerged, which does necessitate high net worth individuals to pursue new initiatives, which utilizes the existing E2 or L1A when it's available, and even the EB1C processes to enter into the United States. So, without any further ado, I want to once again introduce Ed Beshara, who will very kindly introduce his 3 colleagues, all based in the US, some of whom have woken up very early to be with us. I know it's 5:30 a.m. in Los Angeles, so thumbs up for getting up so early for that. Ed Beshara is a member of the Investment Migration Council. He also sits on our advisory committee as a discussion leader. He is an attorney at law with Beshara PA global immigration law firm. Ed and I have known each other for about 5 years, and we've seen each other on the global circuit and sat on different committees, including IIUSA. Edward, I know it's a very good morning to you as well. I hope you're well, and I'm delighted to hand over to you because I know you've got a super interesting set of presentations, or one major presentation, which will look into technical details on this new dawn. So Ed, it's over to you.
Thank you, Bruno, and it's a pleasure being with IMC, and I'd like to first of all, on behalf of our panelists, thank you, Bruno, and the team for organizing such a good event today. I think it's going to be a very interesting session, and something that a lot of attendees and high net worth investors from globally, in fact, are not aware of what we're going to be talking about. But just to add to who I am, I'm an attorney from Australia. I was admitted to the Victorian bar as a barrister and solicitor many years ago, so I've been practicing law for 39 years, business immigration law in the US after an American law degree obtained at the University of Florida Law School. Go Gators. And we've been practicing 37 years business immigration law in the US, 29 years EB5. As Bruno said, a member of IMC Advisory Committee, IIUSA, many committees been involved in. Last year won the Innovator of the Year Award from IIUSA. And adjunct professor of business immigration law at the University of Florida Law School. And very, very passionate about US immigration. But without further ado, let us start off with Laura. Laura, if you could introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Craig and John.
Sure, thank you, Ed. Laura Austin. I've been part of the investment migration industry for nearly 10 years, during which time I've served in an advisory capacity to both governments and the industry as a whole with regards to due diligence best practices. And I currently head the due diligence group specific to this industry at BDO USA, based in New York.
Thank you very much, Laura. Craig.
Thank you, Ed and Bruno, for asking me to participate in today's presentation. I'm very pleased to be here. My name is Craig Rosil. I'm a partner with McDermott, Will & Emery, which is an international law firm with offices in the United States and Europe primarily. I'm a member of the corporate advisory group at McDermott, Will & Emery with a focus on restructuring distressed companies. I've been practicing 34 years, primarily in New York and Florida.
Good. Thank you, Craig, and a good friend as well, you and Laura and John. But John, please introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is John Matzner. I'm the CEO of EIC Technology. My background is with the Foreign Service in the U.S. I was a consular officer in the U.S. State Department, most recently serving in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, where I helped adjudicate some of the visas that we're going to be talking about today in my capacity as a consular officer. Since leaving the Foreign Service, I have been involved, as I like to say it, putting the investment back in investment immigration, meaning looking at some of these programs and some of these categories in a little bit more of a sophisticated business way. So that's my background.
Good. Thank you very much, John. And Bruno is going to help with the slides. So thank you, Bruno. But the title, as Bruno said, is A New Dawn. The reason why we say A New Dawn is because we're going to be talking about throughout the presentation, what is the current state of the US economy, what high net worth individuals may be looking at as far as their goals in the movement from one country to the next. We will be talking about the role of our team, the team of professionals that is key to the success of anyone making a decision to obtain a visa for the US. You're looking at one of the best teams in the country, Craig, Laura, and John, of course, including myself. And then we're going to be looking at what is due diligence, how does it apply to business and investment decisions, as well as the immigration choice, because the immigration goal and the business goal, the investment goal, should be the same and should be running concurrently. So when we look at the title, A New Dawn, a favorable financial approach, the goal for all of us is to advise high net worth individuals to make sure that today, especially today, their goal is, if it's going to be making money, then they can do that. We want them to do that when they are also pursuing the process of obtaining a US visa. So Bruno, I think we can go to the first slide. Right?
How's that?
Slide. Yeah, that's excellent, excellent. So what we're going to do is we're going to be interacting with each other. You know, we've got a very short period of time, so all of us aren't going to be talking for a long period. So when we talk about today, what is the current status of the US from an economic standpoint, immigration, and today we heard some very good news. USCIS will remain open. There was concern about employees being furloughed because of budget concerns, but today, this morning, USCIS, which is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service, will continue to operate, which means that a lot of petitions that can be filed and processed, we can still do that for our clients. So if we talk about the current economic situation in the US, and let's start off with Laura first, ladies first. Let's hear from Laura, then John and Craig. And very briefly, what do you see as the current situation in the US now from an economic standpoint?
Well, I mean, thanks, Ed. I certainly think the U.S. economy is rebounding, which you have it on the slide there. You know, the jobs report, there's a number of new jobs being added. People are returning to work. You know, there's a number of us still working from home, which you can see, but certainly the U.S. is very much open for business, and there's a number of attractive opportunities. I think, as you mentioned at the beginning, it's just having the right advisors to help investors navigate that and pick the right path. But with that, anything's really possible with the U.S.
And John, do you see a movement of high net worth individuals maybe wanting to buy businesses in the US?
Yeah, you've heard me mention this before, Ed, but I like to quote Warren Buffett in being greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. And I think right now, given the state of the pandemic and the crisis, there's an opportunity to capture a lot of value while building an immigration benefit associated with some of these business decisions, which I know we're going to get into more detail today.
Right. Thank you, John. And Craig, you know, as we see more high net worth individuals and investors wanting to come to the US, and from, you know, your standpoint, when you do actually advise on the type of business that maybe needs to be purchased, how would you advise these high net worth individuals? Very briefly, because I know we're going to get into more detail later on.
Right. So, well, right now, as Laura and John touched on, the pandemic has actually put the U.S. economy into a tailspin. Right. We had huge unemployment, but people are getting back to work. There are a lot of distressed opportunities that we're seeing in the United States. I'm a restructuring attorney, so we're pretty busy these days trying to help companies that are struggling with financial and operational problems caused by the pandemic and a temporary cessation of business in the United States for a few months. We're trying to get our feet back underneath us, and but it's been slow. The good news is that our economy and the culture and DNA of many of the folks in corporate America is such that they don't want to stop. So the industry in the United States is still open for business, and there are opportunities. And what I just do is to try to find or advise clients coming from overseas to pick something that they're good at, you know, find an opportunity that will pave the road for success for them.
Thank you, Craig. And, you know, again, I think that, you know, we're looking at an economic situation where we all are in agreement that the elections are coming up. Both parties, the Democrats, the Republicans, want us to get back to do business. We see it. So basically, you know, the high net worth investor in other countries may be looking at the news, but all of us are on the ground level here in the US. And the US is a very large country, and there are different pockets in the US that are doing very well. You know, right now in Orlando, the #1 tourist destination in the world, the attractions are getting back to do business. The hotels are rebounding. We've got sports coming back, and restaurants as well, real estate. So we're seeing a growth right now, and the growth in the US from an economic standpoint could be very attractive for high net worth investors from other countries. And if we can go to the next slide, Bruno? Right. So very quickly, what is the current status of US immigration? Well, until the end of this year, the current administration suspended immigration through obtaining green cards through the US consulate and embassy, except the EB-5 process, except the E-2 process and spouses of US citizens of permanent residence. But what a lot of people don't realize is that if an individual is already in the US under a valid legal status, they can still apply for the green card in the US. Suspension of immigration is only through the US consulate, correct, John? Right?
That's correct. It's the actual issuance of visas rather than the immigration status. The other thing, Ed, I'd add here is that there's been recent guidance opening up a path for existing business L1 authorizations based on meeting certain requirements, which also people are getting issuances and appointments right now. And the structures that we're going to discuss today are certainly eligible for those in many cases.
And especially if it's in the national interest under an L1.
Right.
Business. So I think the new dawn right now for US immigration, and this is what we're going to talk about, is that what we're going to be talking about today has not been emphasized in the past, but we are going to be talking about multinational corporations being able to get their executive, not one, maybe 2 or 3 executive green cards within a 12-month to maybe a 1.5-year period, right? For an investment in a business located anywhere in the US, and usually the retrogression, the delays for this particular category that we talk about, EB1C, are a lot less than EB5. We're also going to be talking about EB5 for those individual investors that want to go through that approach. But if they want to go through that approach, Craig and I just finished writing an article for IIUSA, and we talked about instead of investing $900,000, which is a minimum requirement, they can invest $200,000 and pay the rest off in installments. So Craig and I will get to that. Craig, you're very knowledgeable about having promissory notes secured to pay these installments, but the promissory notes secured by liquid assets, correct?
Yes, Ed, and as you well know, and you pointed out in the article that we published recently, it is now allowed for foreigners to basically finance the funds they need to participate in the EB-5 program. So you can put up some of the cash up front. You have to provide a promissory note to the new commercial enterprise that's raising the capital for the loan, and then you have 2 years to pay off the note. But you also have to collateralize the note by recognized securities accounts or cash accounts that will be acceptable to the NCE. So it's opened more doors as the price of entry through EB-5 is increased. It has we've provided a financing option so that people can still participate.
Right. So that's an advantage. We've got some more advantages regarding EB-5, but we are also going to be talking about EB-1C, the other way of getting a green card. But usually the new commercial enterprises in an EB-5 project will have a lien that they can enforce on these liquid assets because there are some regional centers now that want to get involved in the installment program. But Bruno, if we could go over to the next slide. So right now, the first word that we'd like to say to everyone listening is that don't wait. Now is the time to start the process. Because anytime we are looking at a goal of entering the United States, it's not going to happen in a matter of weeks, right? It's going to be usually a few months of due diligence. It's going to be looking at the advantages of which option to invest in, which option to pursue. I think that basically we are all in agreement that there's no need to wait. The process can start now because there are a lot of choices that need to be made. Let's move on to the next slide, Bruno, if you don't mind. So all of us are going to comment now about why are we emphasizing teamwork? Because anytime we are talking to a potential client, high net worth investor from another country, it's not just a matter of saying, as an immigration lawyer, I think that if you want to pursue EB-5 or L1, EB-1C, well, sure, we're going to go ahead and do that. We all take a holistic approach where we really look at the interests of that individual and the family and really trying to determine what they really want to do. If they really want to come to the US, and we're emphasizing that they should also make money at the same time. So any business choice, investment choice, should run concurrently with an immigration choice. They should complement each other, the business choice, investment choice, and the immigration choice. Those choices should not be separated. And that's why a team approach, because all of us have certain expertise, that's why a team approach is very, very essential to advising that individual. As an immigration attorney, we assess the immigration eligibility, whether they can pursue a certain option or not. We advise on immigration compliance, etc. But there's a role for Laura, John, and Craig to come in and use their due diligence besides the immigration attorney and besides the investor making the choice. Laura, what type of due diligence would you and your team offer? And then we'll go to John and Craig.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, due diligence at its best is a very broadly defined concept, and you'll hear the due diligence that we at BDO do is a little bit different than what John's doing, a little bit different than what Craig is doing. But at its most basic, it's really intended to minimize unnecessary risk and help the investors answer the question, is this a good investment or strategy? In the same way that Ed's going to help advise on, is this the best immigration visa route to choose? So I think, when you look at the context of the various visa options, there are numerous places where due diligence should be implemented. If you look at the L1 or even the E2s, before a multinational business or an individual investor, depending on the visa category, decides to acquire an existing business, for example, we would do due diligence on the entity being acquired in order to minimize the risks of that acquisition. And what that looks like really is an assessment, a deep assessment of reputational and financial risk, as well as value and viability of the business. And so in looking at those certain things, what we're doing is helping the investor make the informed decision of if that's the right acquisition to make. I think with every option in the immigration by acquisition category, there really are risks that can be mitigated with proper due diligence. And this is just an area that BDO, even Craig and John can all help with.
Good, thank you, Laura. And John, please describe your due diligence. Your background becomes very important. And also, you are emphasizing that any high net worth individual should look at the growth and exit strategies as well. John.
So what we've focused on primarily is support to the applicant and the investor beyond just the closing date. And what that means is a combination of, there's certainly upfront due diligence required, but that's oftentimes done by someone like Craig or Laura or their firms. Where we've found ourselves spending most of our time is in the business mechanics, such as the negotiation and structuring of the acquisition, the follow-on management and operational plan. And then, of course, if you're looking to add value to it, in that oftentimes the prospect of coming in cold to a new country with the expectation to manage a significant American staff, there's a lot of help that might need to be provided in the form of just in a variety of forms, whether it's looking at your supply chain of the acquisition or figuring out a particular direct-to-consumer strategy, for example. So that's how we've spent most of our time, is really in supporting this acquisition beyond just, I would say, the upfront requirements associated with it.
Okay, thank you, John. And Craig, from your standpoint, if someone says, look, I want to buy a business or invest in a particular enterprise, how would you first of all start advising them, right?
So I work usually, Ed, with the team at BDO, for instance, with Laura and her colleagues, and help analyze the investment opportunity up front. Because our job is to minimize the risk. We want the foreign investors to make intelligent risks when they come to the United States because of the cultural differences, language differences, et cetera. My law firm, we focus on the legal due diligence, whereas firms like Laura's BDO, they'll focus on operational and financing due diligence. Together, we work as a team to make sure that the business that they're selecting or the industry they're choosing is a right one. It's a good fit for them, and they can be successful right out of the box when they get here. I will set up the corporate structure. We'll pick the proper corporate structure. We'll look at the taxes, the employment issues, things of that nature, contract issues that they need to be concerned about, regulatory issues if they're going into a regulated industry. So we work on the legal side, and then when the client makes the decision, hopefully we've given them the best advice, Laura and I, then we hand over the engagement to John, and then John will act as an advisor consultant to make them successful going forward.
Okay, thank you, Craig. Let's go to the next slide, Bruno, if you don't mind. Okay, so basically, you know, as we go through the process of due diligence and asking the potential client, the high net worth investor, what they need and what they want, we're saying to them, is it your goal? And most of the time it's a goal for the high net worth investor, especially nowadays, considering the pandemic, the economic situation globally, that they want to make money. They just don't want to invest anymore, get a very small rate of return on their investment. They want to make money. How can they make money? Well, a lot of high net worth individuals that are approaching us are saying, look, the economy in their own countries may be not as good as the US. The economy in their own countries, there's a currency devaluation. Where can they put their money where they can grow, you know, financially? So one of the strategies, and this slide is probably, we should call it the first step for the high net worth individual, where they can make money. And it's up to them, of course, after they talk to our team, if they want to do this, but they can purchase real estate right now in the United States. They pay cash, they can have rental income, they can get a mortgage or a loan against that asset, which is secured, and then they use that cash that they get out of that real estate to then put into a US visa option, businesses or regional center projects, or buying their own business, etc. Or they can go to an investment advisor. They can invest their money into wealth management products. We've been talking about that very quickly. But those wealth management products could generate also a very good rate of return. Some of them are very conservative, treasuries, bonds, money market accounts. And they can also borrow against these assets. So these assets that are being purchased by the high net worth investor, real estate, wealth management products, secure, some type of security, they're making money on these products. And then they're really borrowing against these products, taking it out and then putting it into the products that are needed for the immigration process. So we may call that the first step. Let's go to the next slide, Bruno, if you don't mind. We'll quickly go through this, and then we're going to go on to talking about how we're all involved in making choices for the investor and looking at their best option. Right now, we say a holistic approach. We have to really determine what are the visa options. Quick entry into the US, E2, L1, B2. In a matter of a few months, if they decide that they want to buy a business or buy a franchise or start up something new, they can quickly come into the US in a few months. And a lot of times they apply directly at the US consul, or in the case of an L1, they file the petition in the US. Expedited processing is available, getting an answer from the US EIS within 15 days. And then once it's approval, then they go through the consular processing. Longer entry, EB5, EB1C. Once you have petitions filed in the US, then we have to wait for US EIS processing for either an EB5 or EB1C. If they're already in the United States in a legal status under an E2 or B2 or L1, and then subsequent to their entry, they decide that they want to pursue US immigration in the US, they can do that by filing an EB5 petition or filing an EB1C petition. EB1C is a lot faster than EB5, right? Because it's just a matter of the delays. Right now, I think that we're talking about suspension of immigration, but we're not talking about the ability to be able to pursue the green card process if you're already in the US.
Ed, can I make one other clarifying point on that, which is it's the suspension of the issuance of the EB1C, not the suspension of the process to submit them and get in line, essentially. Meaning, if it's approximately a 1-year long process, that clock can start today, and then as soon as the issuance of these particular categories is turned back on, the clock has been running in the background essentially.
Exactly. So if someone comes in and they, as an example, in the US, either in the US under an L1, they've already have an existing business that qualifies for L1, then they get usually a 3-year visa and they get a 2 years of status once they make an entry. If they're in legal status, there's opportunities to file a petition EB1C and concurrently file your applications for the green card if the priority date is current. So there's a lot of different nuances that as a team we can talk to the investors. But if we could go to the next slide, because we want to go through these fairly quickly and then do the analysis, right? E2, investing in a existing business, existing business, franchise, or new business. You have to be a citizen of a treaty country. If not, then we can get you a second citizenship in a matter of a couple of months through places like Grenada, for example, or Turkey or Montenegro. If we could go to the next slide, Bruno. If you do an investment in EB5 today, it's $900,000 as a minimum investment plus an admin fee anywhere from $50,000 to $70,000. If the location of the business under an EB5 is not in a target employment area or rural area, then basically it's $1.8 million. Now, today with the new definition of what a TEA is, the rural definition has not changed, but most urban areas would not be considered TEAs, right? Would not be considered. So most urban businesses that are under the regional center scenario, most would be requiring a $1.8 million investment. Let's move on, Bruno. EB5, the process could take 7 years to get a full green card. Right now, it's probably more, 2.5 to 5 years. But you know, if it reaches 2 years, we can always go to the federal courts and try to force the government to make a decision through what's called a mandamus action. But usually, 2.5 years before you get your conditional green card under EB5. Conditional green card, 2 years. Then you file a petition to remove the conditions, 2 years. And while we're on EB5, and I want everyone's opinion, for those individuals that really don't want to be involved in running a business, those individuals that want to leave it to someone else and they don't mind about delays, is EB5 Regional Center Project, is it a good option for some high net worth individuals? John?
I think there's other options. I think any investment that returns less than 1% with the type of hold period in EB5, there's more compelling options, and there's ways to, through association or proper structuring or proper agreements, generate an eligibility. However, I believe the best use case right now, currently for EB5, is people who aren't eligible for another category, meaning they have no other way to generate their eligibility.
All right. So let's move on to the next slide. So basically, if we've been talking about L1s, intracompany transfers, yes, currently suspended, but there are some exceptions, right? So if someone has a foreign company and they want to come in quickly into the US, well, then they can set up a new office, but they only get 1 year. But in that 1 year, they would have to really build up their business with higher level managers and executives. The alternative is that once they're here under a new office, L1, they can then buy an existing business with Craig's help, Laura's help, and of course, John, to say, okay, I'm buying an existing business with an organizational hierarchy. I can quickly do that. And then I can convert my 1 year stay maybe into a 2 year status with a 3 year L1 visa, and then pursue the EB1C. Before I get to you, John, Craig and Laura, when we're talking about multinational corporations and setting up a US subsidiary, Laura, very quickly, what is the role for you and BDO to be able to advise the high net worth investor and the foreign company in setting up a US operation?
Yeah, certainly. I think a lot of that has to do with just an assessment of the industry, the market. You're really looking at the risks that they're going to undertake compared to purchasing or acquiring an existing entity. I think both come with risk. Certainly there's more due diligence, I think, involved when it comes to the acquisition of an existing business, although John, I know, would argue that there's far less risk in acquiring an existing business. But certainly there's due diligence that's going to be required on both. And I think if they're establishing their own entity here, it's really about getting their entry into the market, into the culture, understanding the business environment that they're operating in and what they need to set up.
Thank you. And Craig?
Yeah, so in addition to what Laura just said on the selecting an industry and a business that will be, lead to a road of success, one of the first issues we see from foreign entities or individuals who are affiliated with companies that want to launch in the United States, so they're already successful in other parts of the world. The first three questions they ask are all about taxes. So they want to minimize their income tax exposure in the United States, and they only want to pay taxes once, especially if some of the funds are going back home, wherever home is. So we always bring in the international tax professionals, and we'll devise a structure, a tax structure where that's designed to minimize their tax exposure.
Good, thank you. What we're going to do is we're going to get through the next few slides very quickly, then get to come back to John, and then we can look at the analysis of L1, EB1Cs, comparing those to EB5. Bruno, if we could go to the next slide, please. So basically, when we're looking at making a decision from a business standpoint and an immigration standpoint, we know that when you buy a new business, when you set up a new business, let's say, especially for the L1, there are many risks involved, because are you going to be able to build up that business within 1 year to get an extension beyond that 1 year? The solution is existing businesses, buying existing businesses that have an organizational hierarchy, as we just said, and then basically that would be the basis for getting maybe an L1 for 3 years. When you come into the US, you get a 2-year status, and then immediately using that US business to start the process for the green card under EB1C. If we could go to the next slide, Bruno, please. We're talking about what is the quick solution for US permanent residency, purchasing an existing business. I think that we're going to come back to John. I want to get through these couple of slides first, but purchasing an existing business is, we've already gone through the process. This is fast permanent residency for immediate EB1C filing, right? So the US company can file the EB1C for the executive and family, and then they can do it in the US. They don't have to leave if they don't want to. But it's not only using the US business for the EB1C to petition for one executive and family, but for the same purchase price, they can petition for maybe the second executive family and the third executive and family. Bruno, if we could go to the next slide, please. So when we're comparing L1 and E2, and then I'll let John come in, getting someone to come in quickly in a matter of a few months is the L1 approach or the E2 approach. The E2 approach, yes, you can buy an existing business or franchise or set up your own, maybe $150,000. We can get someone in a matter of a few months. But, and it could be 5 years, multiple entry, but you're running a US business, and the E2 by only an investment of $150,000 is not going to really get you the green card. And if you're not a citizen of the E2 country, then you can buy citizenship in another country. You're spending at least $250,000. By the time you put another $150,000 into an existing business in the US, you're already at $500,000 to come in, yes, under an E2 very quickly to the US, but you're spending that much money to be able to get an E2, especially if you're not a citizen of the country. But John, L1, why is the L1 and buying an existing business a very good choice in the beginning to come into the US? John, we can't hear you. We can't hear you.
I'll tie it into the title of this webinar, which is A New Dawn. What we're talking about today holistically, and it actually supersedes any specific category like L1 or E2 or EB1C, is rather than using real estate developments primarily or franchises to generate immigration eligibility, which is the options that have historically existed, what we're talking about today, the new dawn, is using existing businesses. And from a profile perspective, from a decision-making perspective, using an existing business to generate an immigration eligibility, by the way, even with an EB-5 visa, using an existing business rather than, say, a real estate development, offers several advantages in the form of there's no minimum financial requirement, there's no geographic restriction, it's faster, it's more lucrative, it returns more than 1% like an EB-5 project, it can support multiple applications from the same country, and it's more secure in the form that the existing business's assets and cash flow can be part of the security associated with the initial investment. So the new dawn and the advantages of this is even bigger than one specific category, because Ed is going to help you decide which categories are best. What the new dawn is using this new, it's not a new asset class, but using this strategy, which is existing business acquisition to generate lucrative, fast, de-risked immigration eligibility.
Right, thank you, John. We're going to go over to the next slide, and then I'm going to call Laura and Craig to comment on the next slide. But say, for example, if, and John can also comment, so if someone comes in under the L1, okay, they're going to usually get a 2-year status while they're in the United States. If they come in under an E2, usually they have a 2-year status while they're in the US. But you only get a 2-year status on the L1 if, as you see in the column, that you buy an existing business. If you have a new office, you only get a 1-year status. So while you're legally in the US, you can jump from either an L1 or E2 status and file an EB1 petition, right? If you file the EB1 petition while you're in the US, you can concurrently file your applications for the green card, where you're going to get your green card in the US and not at the US consul. And you could even do that today, because, you know, the immigration suspension we're talking about is through the US consul processing for EB1C. So let's move over to the next slide very quickly, because we're running out of time. E2 to EB5, and I'll get Craig and Laura to jump in on this slide, and then John, you're going to jump in on the next one. But if someone comes in under an E2 and they say, look, you know, we've invested $150,000, but we want to use our own E2 business to go to EB5, yes, they can put more money into their own business to get an EB5 petition filed, right? So if they put in 150, 200,000, and the location of their business is in a target employment area or rural area, then they're going to have to put in another 700,000. If you go to an EB5 now, and it's got to be an EB5 regional center, they may have to invest $900,000. If they've already put in to that regional center business, and there's ways of doing that. Let's say they've put in $300,000, and they say, okay, they still owe $600,000 into an EB5 regional center project. And I'll ask Craig, and then I'll ask Laura. So Craig, if someone says, I've got $300,000 to put into a EB5 regional center business, completely separate, they're not really managing the business, it's a regional center operation, and then they say, well, we want to finance the $600,000. So they've got the real estate, they've got liquid assets in as far as wealth management products. So just to reiterate, they can pay off the $600,000 in installments over a 2-year period of $25,000 per month. But the regional center NCE needs to have a promissory note secured by those assets. Correct, Craig? And talk about the lien that's needed. We've only got a very short period of time, please.
Right. So yeah, you're right, Ed. They would sign a promissory note for the balance of $600,000. It's got to be payable within 2 years. So they have 24 months to pay it off, and it's got to be collateralized by a pledge of assets in an investment account, or perhaps a mortgage on real property that would be acceptable to the NCE, whoever's raising the money for that EB5 project. So, and it's got to be enforceable. So that if there is a default, if the investor defaults, then the NCE can look to the collateral, obviously, to satisfy the note.
Okay, so basically, it's for those individuals, Laura, that may have already wanted to make money. They've got put money into real estate, wealth management products, but now they want to invest in a really passive way where they're not going to really make money out of the EB5 Regional Centre project. They're making very little rate of return usually, but they can do it this way if they want to. But the process of getting the green card is longer. But there's only a few regional centres that will accept. There are some that will accept, we know them, with this instalment program. So how would you advise that investor that says, look, I want to pay this off on a monthly basis? Do you give any advice to the investor, or is it something that you do generally?
No, I certainly think, this is one of those things where we talk about a united team and making sure these investors have a team of advisors that can help them with this sort of thing. I don't think this is necessarily something BDO would advise on, but certainly there are benefits to each. And this is, I think, where someone would come to someone like you, Ed, and say, look, I need to know my options and what can I do and what's the best choice, because that's certainly a viable option for some people.
Right. And of course, not all regional centers will do that. So let's move on to the last slide, and then I'm going to get John to jump in. Thank you. So basically, we're talking about now the immigration choice, the financial choice, the business choice. Craig and Laura, are wonderful in giving this advice. But now, John, when we're talking about the comparison with EB1C and EB5, and someone says, I want to make money, I want to be able to grow the business, I want to be able to have an exit strategy, and not just make money through wealth management products and real estate for step one, but step two, when I'm putting money into a business. When we look at the comparison, tell us about the comparison, EB1C or EB5, generally.
So the way that I think about it, Ed, is I had a business mentor once teach me, people don't buy 5/8 inch drill bits, they buy 5/8 inch holes, meaning they're buying the result, not the tool, right? And I think when you look at the deliverables, meaning what benefits are granted to the individual, when you look at the deliverables associated with business acquisition as an immigration strategy, the deliverables are significantly improved compared to EB5. And EB5 historically has relied on, there was no viable or predictable option other than them. And so when you look at the deliverables, whether that's the initial authorization, how quick you get that initial visa, how quickly you get your green card, the rate of return on your money, how long it takes to have your money returned. If you look at any individual metric, the strategy of business acquisition is objectively superior if you're eligible for it. So that's how I think about that difference, which is when you're looking at what those objective measures are of a good immigration and business process, business acquisition is a extremely, extremely competitive strategy.
Good. Yes, John. And then also with the EB5, it's for those people that want to be passive. They have, they want to put their money into a project where they can sit back, rely on the experts to run the business, and they just don't want to be involved. But with a $900,000 investment for EB5, it allows one investor and family. EB1C, where you're buying your own business and running it, John's company may help with the management. Craig and Laura are there to give due diligence and guidance as well. But if you buy an existing business under the EB1C scenario, it could be located in any location, not just a target employment area, rural area, any location. And also the amount that you're purchasing that US business for could be $900,000 or $1 million or more, and it has that organizational hierarchy that qualifies. Guess what? You may be able to bring over not just the main executive and family, but the second executive and family, the third executive and family for that one purchase, right? So Craig and Laura, when you're looking at, and we have to finish with this, because then I'm sure Bruno's got some questions for us. But when you're looking at purchasing this existing business, very different due diligence in choosing an EB5 regional center project, right? Because there is due diligence and there are companies that can do that on existing regional centers. Some are very good, but when they're purchasing their own business, Craig, with your background, in one last word, what do you advise? What needs to be done?
Well, the vast difference between the two investments, where you're going to be running and operating and managing employees and a business that generates goods or services in the United States versus being a passive investor in, say, a real estate development project. I just tell folks that they have to be on their A game. They should select an industry that they're familiar with, that they know from back home, and that they also devise a growth projection strategy that's got tax benefits to it, and that they have an exit strategy. You got to think ahead of where you want to be 5, 10 years if someone from the United States was going to start up a brand new business.
Right, and I think John would agree with the growth and exit strategy. And Laura, you're a globe. BDO is global. Not only are you advising high net worth investors globally, but also in the US. And you're there. BDO is there to help them financially and from a cost standpoint, knowing where to spend the money, how to spend it, and watching them from a tax standpoint.
Sure, yeah, certainly. I think part of the value that BDO brings is if the person from a foreign jurisdiction wants to acquire a company in the United States, they can work locally with BDO where they are and with BDO where they want to go. So it certainly helps to have one company that's a liaison for an individual between the two jurisdictions. But if someone is looking to acquire an existing company, certainly in addition to what Craig and his firm provide, I think it really takes a deep dive into the reputational and financial risks that may be incurred, and then at the same time looking at the value and viability of the business as a whole.
Good. And John, we've got 1 minute left, but just emphasize the fact that your company can also help them not only buy that compliant EB1C or L1 business, but your company can also provide management services as well. Not interfere with their role as an executive or manager under the L1 or EB1C structure that's needed, but you can also advise them from a management standpoint. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would maybe challenge the word passive or owner operator is the only option, in that there are ways to structure the role of the entrepreneur such that they maintain a strategic leader within the company, but are not responsible to open the door at 8 a.m. and close it at 5 p.m. every day, through intelligent management structuring, and while still meeting all the immigration requirements, not necessitate, again, you being behind the back of the cash register for an oversimplification. So that's intelligent structuring can create that.
Thank you, John. Bruno, last slide, please.
All right.
Next slide. Bruno, the next slide. One slide left.
There we go. It's the help.
The last word in self-help is help. Choose. The best option is to choose an experienced team of professionals. Craig, Laura, John, myself. There's no way that one can second guess about how to make a move to the US. We are calling this the new dawn. We're calling this, if you want to come into the US is open for business. If you want to come into the US and make money, which we can advise and put you in contact with the people that can advise you of how to do that, use that first step in making money, getting into certain asset classes, and using that to, at the same time, involve yourself in an immigration process concurrently, and then you're able to have peace of mind in moving yourself, your family, and other executives and foreign nationals into the US. So the last word in self-help is help. Don't try to do this yourself, or try to go with people that don't know what they're doing. Thank you, Bruno.
All right.
And thank you.
Thank you so much. I have been uncharacteristically quiet today. I've been moderating and looking at what's been coming in, and certainly overwhelmingly, there are quite a few people in today's audience that want to make money through businesses. So there's a few questions that have come in. Perhaps what I'll do is I'll put these to you, and then Ed, perhaps you can decide who's best to answer them. And if we try and keep our answers short, then we can get through as many of these as possible, guys. All right. So the first question that has come in is, how long does it take for an L1 petition to be approved by USCIS, or an E2 to be approved by a US consulate? given the situation, that's some of the consular offices are still currently closed.
Well, first of all, the L1 petition can be filed with premium processing, and we should, under normal circumstances, get an answer back from USCIS within 15 days of that petition being filed. And in fact, if they want to buy an existing business, we can condition the purchase of that existing business on an approval from USCIS, hopefully within 15 days. John, what about consulate processing? How long does it take?
If you can get an appointment, and that's on the basis of your file, in Dubai, you can get an appointment in 1 day. So if you have your petition, you set an appointment, you go in, and they issue the visa right there.
But under these conditions now, would it take?
I think it would be varied by geography, which offices are open. Johannesburg's open, but Cape Town's closed, that kind of thing.
Okay.
All right.
Good. Thank you.
Another question that came in is, how long can the high net worth executive initially stay in the US?
If they're under an L1 and they have an L1 visa, if it's a new office, they're setting up from scratch, well, then the visa is only 1 year. And then when they enter the US, they will get a approval to stay in the US for only 1 year. John, if they buy an existing business, and sorry, Craig and Laura, these are immigration questions, but John, if they get if there's already an existing US business, they
Correct.
get a, how long?
So if they do an existing stock sale of an existing business, their initial L1 issuance is for 3 years. And you can also speed up the time in which you can apply for your green card, the EB1C, by 1 year. Meaning, if you buy a business today, you can get a 3-year L1 in your passport. You can also immediately file for your EB1C, which, given current processing times, comes within probably 12 to 18 months based on where you're from. But that is a very quick immigration proposition compared to alternatives.
And then when you enter the US under an L, if you have a 3-year L1 visa, you enter the US and then you get a 2 years of status. And then if the priority date is current, basically you can file your EB1C petition in the US and still apply in the US for the green card and get work authorization permission to travel if you want to do it that way. But L1 is a dual intent visa. It means that the US Customs Border Protection, when you're coming back in, they see that you're coming back in under an L1 non-immigrant visa. And even if you file an EB1C petition for an immigration status, because inherent in the L1 is a dual intent, there is no objection to the US Customs Border Protection inspectors at the airport allowing you to come in.
All right. Staying on the subject of executives and managers, a question came in here from a viewer in India. How many executives or managers can be petitioned for the US subsidiary in order to apply for US permanent residency?
Well, I don't want to leave Laura and Craig out. Well, first of all, if there is going to be a US business, and I'll let John answer too, that will be the basis for an L1 or EB1C, Craig and Laura, when we look at an existing business, maybe for purchase with the executives and managers, very quickly, Craig and Laura, is that how do we know if the business is going to be financially viable? How do we know whether this is the right business for that particular multinational corporation?
Well, I think, Ed, I'll start. You have to have certain capacity to generate certain amount of revenue if you want to bring over a team of professionals. You and I have worked on this for some companies out of Vietnam. If you remember, they wanted to bring over seven managers, and you had to have a certain size to the business by number of employees, and you also had to have minimum capital requirements, right? So these are all factors that have to play into how large an operation you can sustain to bring over as many folks as you'd like to get status.
Right. Thank you, Craig. And Laura, before you go to John, Laura?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's looking at the history of the company. If you're really trying to assess the financials, once you know the context and then it meets the requirements, then it's really looking at the history and the performance of the company.
John, what is the right structure for an EB1C? What type of US business, existing business?
It depends. They tend to be businesses that are employment heavy because it creates more verifiable structures. So they tend to be businesses where 50 to 80% of their ongoing costs are payroll. So that would eliminate things like manufacturing.
Yeah, but I think that the person asking the question, maybe how many high-level executives, how many managers?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, look, if you buy a $20 million company, you can bring 30 people over. If you're trying to do it on the cheap, it's going to be tight, and that's only can be determined in consultation with an experienced attorney like Ed. So,
but there should be also high-level executives and managers in the US operation. Bruno.
It didn't specify the numbers in the question. A question that came in. I want to get in touch with Laura on a due diligence, specific due diligence question. How can I get in touch with Laura? Well, so for everybody, all our panelists, I'm sure all you guys have LinkedIn profiles, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Kind of nodding, yeah. So do a search on LinkedIn for the speakers, and please reach out to them directly on their LinkedIn profiles, or alternatively send us an email and we'll happily pass that on. So we've got time for one final question is, can the US subsidiary business be located in any urban or rural area of the United States? Maybe Craig and John can touch on that.
Well, I think so, right? The only limitations I'm aware of, John, are EB-5, right? If you're investing in targeted employment areas versus non-targeted employment areas, that's where geography makes a difference, right? But with respect to the other visas that we were chatting about today, I think the sky's the limit. You could go anywhere.
The amount of flexibility that business acquisition gives is not only in the amount of capital you need to contribute, the industry, but also the geography. So you have essentially carte blanche to choose any geography in association with making an intelligent business decision.
But Bruno, just very quickly, when EB-5 became very popular 13 years ago, the definition of a TEA basically allowed any urban area almost to be considered a target employment area with a minimum investment of 500,000. As we said, today's definition of a TEA is at most urban areas, which could be a matter of first choice for a lot of business people. You can't do it. It would have to be a $1.8 million investment. There are EB-5 regional center projects that are in target employment areas and that are in rural areas that are very good, excellent for those high net worth investors that want to make the EB-5 as a choice. But we're talking about a new dawn for other choices. Remember, when we all act as a team to file these petitions, right behind me is a typical petition, whether it's EB-5, L1, EB-1C. That's a typical petition for one person, right? So it's a lot of teamwork that has to be involved to put that petition together. By the way, that was approved. That petition was approved. So paper.
It was approved based on the weight of it. You can see how large it is.
Well done, Craig. Right, ladies and gentlemen, any 30 seconds, last thoughts going forward? Perhaps we start with John on the right hand of the screen.
Sure. So for me, what I would just want people to know is if you're examining immigration options to the US, look us up, send me a message on LinkedIn, and hear the pitch in detail as it may or may not apply to your situation. And what I mean by that is having an appreciation for what some alternatives to the classic EB-5 program might be. I think the advantages are extremely compelling. And in association with the other members of this call, I think that there's a dartboard with a lot of EB-5 folks with my face on it, throwing darts at my face because what I'm doing right now is essentially trying to provide a competitive alternative to what has historically been established. So thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you, John.
Laura, thoughts going forward, takeaway points?
Yeah, I certainly think get the right team of advisors. It's the best way to proceed, and do your due diligence. The most I can say is due diligence is often a piece that gets left out, and I think it's one of the most important pieces in any transaction that you do. So find the right advisors and do your due diligence.
Yeah, and
thank you.
And I'm a very strong advocate of due diligence, as you know, because Laura sits on our work group on due diligence for investment migration, and has contributed with BDO and her industry colleagues on 2 reports that we published at the beginning of this year on due diligence standards within investment migration. So once again, thank you for that, Laura. Craig Brazil, final thoughts, takeaway points, please, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Bruno, for the opportunity today. I agree with Ed and John about the new dawn. I've worked on primarily EB5 projects for the last 5-6 years, some on the new upfront, new startups, and then some on the restructuring side where the projects have failed. I do think that high net worth individuals are looking for alternatives to EB5. You know, our country basically increased the price of admission for EB5 last November. So this is a great opportunity for us to highlight the capabilities of this panel and how we can help. Of course, on my side, I can help with legal due diligence and some of the business side due diligence. And like I said, I work in conjunction frequently as a team. None of us are the captains of our own ship. We work in teams and work with BDO and companies like John's to help provide a one-stop shopping type of a place to help folks who are coming to a foreign country, foreign culture, and trying to get immigration status. So more than happy to help.
First of all, Bruno, thank you.
Edward,
I'd like to
from you.
Thank you, Bruno. Thank you. I'd like to thank Laura, John, and Craig for joining us today. And thank you, Bruno. The last thought is that, number one, we talked about the new dawn. The approach is that if someone wants to call us, we'd have a quick conversation. And then we say, well, what is the next step in moving forward with an immigration process? You know, we don't mind doing that. But when we move forward with an immigration process, then we're suggesting a team approach and the best team to advise. Yes, we did talk about L1, EB1C as an option, a new dawn, the forgotten visas. We're not criticizing EB5. We're saying for certain high net worth investors, EB5 is their first choice. And there are some wonderful EB5 regional center projects and processes. Craig and I and our law firms were part of the professional team for the City of Miami and their EB5 regional center. We did a big EB5 regional center project last year. We're not saying don't do EB1C, it's only for those that want to do it. But what John and Laura and Craig and I are saying, Bruno, is that the new dawn is that there's a very good alternative, L1 and EB1C as well. And to get to that point, to show that that is probably the best alternative for some high net worth investors, we need to do this holistic approach, analyze it. What is the investor? What do they want to achieve? We're saying make money, you can do that, and at the same time pursue an immigration process. But we can only do that working as a together with the high net worth investor. And fortunately, we are involved with IMC, and that's why, Bruno, thank you for having an organization that allows us to be involved and put out this message. So thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ed. And thank you to you, our audience from all over the world, for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed and found today's session interesting. As I mentioned before, if you want to get in touch and get more help about your immigration questions, please reach out to any of the panelists directly through social media or through the IMC, and we'll happily provide the introductions as quickly as possible. If final words from my side, if you're not already a member of the IMC, please visit our website, investmentmigration.org, information on joining and supporting the work we do. There's lots of daily updates on what's happening in the industry right now in Europe, in the Caribbean, and in the USA. We will be back on Wednesday, the 9th of September, same time, 2:30 Central European Summer Time. And we'll be discussing the US EB5 Regional Center program ahead of its scheduled September 30th sunset dates. So we'll hear from industry leaders on the state of play on Capitol Hill, as well as insights into the coming US presidential election and the impacts that may have on the EB5 program going forward. other key topics, we'll look at how EB5 can play and should be playing a role in the economic recovery that is, ahead of us in the next 12 to 18 months at least. So until then, stay safe, and thank you very much for joining us. Thank you once again to our panelists, and wishing you all a great day ahead, and stay safe. And now we'll play the IMCET education video. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno.